I am Angelique, by the way. I am the owner of Tree to Train. I'm the one giving this presentation on the conservation detection dogs. And this is one of my favorite topics ever. So I am a dog behaviorist and trainer. I'm also a level 1 judge and a blue level instructor for the World Scent Dog Association. And my next project is training bat carcass detection dogs here in Pretoria. Let me just get us a full screen and then we can go. Okay, cool. If there are any technical difficulties, you guys can just let me know. Okay, cool. So let's get started. So obviously this webinar is a brief sniff on conservation detection dogs. So what are conservation detection dogs? They are pretty awesome dogs. That's what they are. They're used to aid in conservation efforts. They are usually trained to find a specific scent. So that scent could be anything from scat to live animals to carcasses, or simply just them indicating that something was there. And they protect a wide range of plants and animals, mammals, arthropods, AVs, you name it. They can be breeds from different backgrounds, any type of breed. It doesn't have to be purebred. And recently, pet dogs are being considered because of the convenience and the costs involved in the training. Okay, so here are the 3 categories that we have. So generally, the 2 that I'm going to be talking about in this webinar is the endangered species or the ecological monitoring dogs, and the invasive species dogs, basically. Not so much the anti-poaching work, but I will briefly mention that because a lot of that is happening in South Africa at the moment. I love detection dogs for helping researchers, students, ecologists, because as humans, we generally really struggle to find samples, and the dogs can make it so much easier for us, and they improve accuracy of the data that we get. So your endangered species or ecological monitoring dogs, they are generally used in research for environmental impact assessments, things like that. So, of course, the invasive species detection dogs, they prevent or identify samples, and they aid in the removal or management of invasive species. And then lastly, of course, the anti-poaching detection dogs, they do vehicle searches, they screen at ports of entry, or they're the dogs that go out after poaching has occurred to go find the poachers. And of course, they are used in forensic science as well. So why dogs? So we all know that dogs have amazing noses. There's such a large portion of their brain that is dedicated to scent. And I don't think us as humans really understand that, because of course scent doesn't play such a huge role in our world. I'm pretty sure they dream in smells, but yeah. And we can harness their sense of smell to help us with conservation. So when we look at humans, we have around 6 million olfactory receptor cells, and that's nothing compared to dogs. So in a study that Horowitz did, you can see here that the sheepdogs have more than 200 million olfactory receptor cells, and beagles have around or more than 300 million olfactory receptor cells. Dogs also have different kinds of olfactory receptor cells compared to us, and so they're able to detect different odors, and they can also detect odors that are at much lower concentrations than we can. So that's 500 parts per trillion. So you could also kind of think of that as a teaspoon of sugar in the size of 2 Olympic swimming pools. And on the left here, I just have a few diagrams explaining how the dog is able to smell and breathe. So you'll see that the air separates into two distinct pathways. You'll see the red one is the olfactory area. So this is the top visual now. And the blue is actually where the air passes into the lungs. So they can breathe and smell at the same time. In the second one, you can actually see the olfactory pathway is the pathway that's yellow-brown, and that's where the smell receptors are located. And the pink behind that is just for respiration. And then the last visual, it actually explains why dogs are able to determine where a scent comes from, because they can inhale, and then when they exhale, they push the air through the slits on the side of their noses, as you can see in that visual. So it doesn't disturb the incoming air. And then they can actually take in more odors as they're going along. Okay, so dogs also have amazing agility, speed, and size. So just note that not all dogs are of suitable sizes. For example, a Great Dane won't be able to do work sniffing out burrowing animals because they're likely to collapse tunnels. A smaller dog would be better suited to that. In general, the conservationists like using medium-sized dogs. The dogs love working with us humans, and they love to search and play. To them, it's a game. And here you can see in this graph at the bottom how the use of conservation detection dogs has actually increased over the years, and it's actually got more exposure in recent years. So you can see the number of publications, not only in scientific literature, but also in the news or in books or in popular articles, which is really, really great. So dogs versus other methods. So this is exactly why I love dogs, and I can't understand why we don't use dogs more often. So in a review done, I'll talk about this review later on, so don't worry about it too much now. Dogs performed better in most of the cases, as you can see in this table. And when they were worse off, it was totally dependent on the circumstances, on the specific situation. So dogs had were more efficient searchers, they had improved detection rates, they're unbiased when compared to us humans, and they can smell out more than one thing at the same time. They performed much better than humans in most situations. Data collection is often faster than when using technology as well. For example, we would need to leave camera traps out for months on end at a time, perhaps, where in a month, the dog could be collecting all the data for you ready. So in the instances where the dogs performed worse, it was actually due to training mistakes or the dog's personality not being suited to the work. So we'll get into that a little bit later. The dogs can also experience frustrations when their target scent is at low densities, and that could actually demotivate them as well. If they can't find it, they can't get their reward. The size of the target might also be large enough for humans to easily detect. For example, a bird of prey carcass is generally easy to spot for humans as well. And in that instance, it's not really needed to get a dog. The vegetation could also be dense, or there could be dangerous terrain where the dogs, of course, can't work. And in some instances, the use of a dog is actually, it costs more. And on to the next slide. So what can they detect? They can detect a lot of things. So they've been used to detect invasive Argentinian ants so that they could eradicate the ants or do further research on them. They've been used to detect bat scat or bat carcasses on wind farms, invasive plant species, diseases in the plants, invasive insects in the plants. They've been used to detect bumblebee nests, actual diseases. We all know about the dogs sniffing out COVID already. Live animals like hedgehogs, they've been used to detect burrowing mammals, burrowing animals, fungi, remains of animals, and the list just goes on and on. These are just a few examples. The dogs can also work almost anywhere. They can work in rural, urban, aquatic, and marine environments. We'll do a few examples later on in the webinar. So why does this even matter? Why do the dogs actually need to go out and do this? Basically for conservation and to limit biodiversity loss. So because we can get better data, we can make better inferences on populations, on the occurrence of species. A lot of instances, we don't even know that a species occurs there until the dog actually comes in and does a survey. Some of the samples that are collected could help us determine the health of the individual or the health of the population and the species, how much stress the species is under, what they're eating, a whole bunch of other things. And this actually allows us to influence laws and legislation and management in the area, which is going to help us conserve and limit biodiversity loss, which of course we know is a huge issue at the moment. Okay, so 3 common myths. So myth number 1, only purebred dogs can do conservation detection work. So that is not at all true. Most of the dogs are actually mixed bred dogs at the moment working, but not all of them, of course. As long as the dog is healthy with a great play or food drive, preferably a play drive, and preferably with a low prey drive, they can do it. Ideally, we'd like the dogs to be emotionally stable as well and easily motivated. And this is actually ideal for a lot of dogs that can't be detection dogs in other instances. For example, maybe dog aggressive dogs that won't be able to work in a city or anything like that. They are well suited to helping conservation efforts. So myth number 2 is that a dog needs to be bought for this. So that is also not true. A dog can be bought, but it can also be rescued. Most of the dogs that are actually employed now, I think, are rescue dogs. We'll go into this a little bit later as well. So these dogs can be pet dogs from volunteers, or they can be working dogs owned by an organization that focuses on this type of work as well. There are some breeds that will be ill-suited to this. They maybe have a high prey drive. A breed that comes to mind is a greyhound, for example. Of course, you always look at the individual dog, but this is just a generalization. So myth number 3 is that the dogs are bad for the wildlife because they chase or disturb the wildlife. So there are many ways to limit this and avoid this. You definitely do training for this as well. And the dogs care about their reward. A lot of the dogs that are used in this line of work are ball crazy dogs, and they only care about the ball. I know of other conservation detection dog handlers that have done surveys in Africa. The dogs have indicated on the target scent, and an elephant walks past, starts browsing. The handler can't go to the dog because the dog is off lead. So because this dog was actually trained to indicate for a long time and really well, the handler was actually able to stay away, wait for the elephant to pass, and then go in and reward the dog and collect the sample. So definitely that is not something that is a worry. Okay, so it's not just the dogs that are important. The handlers are pretty important. The dogs are kind of the easy parts of this sometimes. So handlers, they got to be curious. They have to have good communication skills. They have to be creative, adaptable, and physically suited to field work. Oftentimes they have to carry quite a bit of gear because they might be backpacking over terrains in the mountains. They have to make sure to carry first aid. They have to carry food for their dogs and for themselves. They have to carry the samples. anything in their kit that's really needed for that survey. They have to be willing to work in all sorts of weather and terrain. Sometimes these handlers need to crawl through the mud, crawl through thorn bushes, slide down hills, run up hills, because they need to keep up with their dog. And this job, unfortunately, also requires months of travel at a time sometimes. Sometimes you're also alone in the field, and that's something they'll need to be okay with, dependent on the circumstances. And just like a lot of fields in conservation, the pay really isn't great. And on to the next slide. So here we have a review that came out last year in June that looked at the use of detection dogs, the breeds used, and compared their performance to other methods. So the data I had earlier in the table comes from this review. So this map just shows the use of conservation detection dogs around the world, where the darker green indicates increased uses. So I also find it interesting that it kind of correlates with developed and undeveloped or non-developed countries. So detection dogs are used worldwide, except for the Antarctic mainland. The next graph just shows the number of publications of different things that the dogs detect. Here, the one that's often detected is mammals. So this could be mammal scat, anything like that. Something that's also detected quite a lot after that is birds, so your aves. And then after that, you have your insects, your plants, your reptiles, things like that. Just something interesting of note is that New Zealand was actually at the forefront of conservation detection dogs, having trained the first conservation detection dogs that were trained to find kiwi and cockapoo in the 1890s. And of course, since then it's increased, as we've seen before. Okay, and now some of my favorite people doing this type of work. So here we have the Center for Conservation Biology from the University of Washington. Dr. Samuel is really the one that pioneered wildlife scat detection work around the 1997. So they only work with rescue dogs. They go to shelters, they get dogs that are absolutely ball crazy, that are really ill-suited to be pet dogs. And these are the dogs they use. So here you can actually see in this photo of this dog, it's pretty ball obsessed. It's waiting for its reward there. So they've done a lot of work with a lot of different samples. They've worked with tigers, killer whales, owls, bears, wolves, mice, plants, salamanders, sea turtles, and I'm sure there will be lots more to come. So if you want to know about the methods that they use to train their dogs, you can have a look at this article here, Scat Detection Dogs in Wildlife Research and Management. They have a quite detailed explanation in that article. Right. So here's a great example of something that the dogs helped with. So they used conservation detection dogs to conduct surveys of northern spotted owls and barred owls. So normally vocalizations are used to assess whether owls occupy the areas. So they typically elicit response from the owls using simulated conspecific vocalizations to find the northern spotted owls in the area. But if there are barred owls close to these spotted owls, then they don't vocalize because they're a significant threat to them. So the dogs are actually able to detect the owl pellets underneath their roosting sites. And they actually found that the probabilities are significantly higher for detection when using dogs versus the vocalization surveys. So the barred owl is the picture at the top, and the northern spotted owl is the owl at the bottom. So this was found to be a reliable method, and it can actually be used simultaneously with the vocalizations to assess occupancy in an area. Ooh, my favorite now. So these dogs have actually been used to detect killer whale scat. So this population of southern resident killer whales have been endangered since 2005, and the population had very little chance of recovery because of low offspring. The females kept aborting and they didn't know why. They thought maybe it's because of toxins or vessel disturbances, because there are seasonal tourist vessels and fishing vessels that do go there. Or it might be because of the food availability in the area. They weren't sure. And the problem with doing this and using SCAT to get data from is that the SCAT doesn't float for long. In very, very good conditions, it only floats for about 20 minutes. If the water is a little bit choppy, it breaks up and sinks very, very quickly. So you can imagine how difficult it is to actually find scat in the open ocean. So what they did is they started training dogs to see if they're able to detect scat in the open ocean. So what they do now is they load the dogs up on the boats and they start following pods. As soon as there's scat floating in the water, they watch the dog's body language and the dog indicates which way to go and where the scat is. As soon as they get the scat, the dog is rewarded for finding it. From this, they actually determined the real reason why these females kept aborting is because of the salmon population and not having enough food, unfortunately. But this wouldn't have been possible if they didn't have the dogs to help. All right, so next we have the use of dogs for estimating cougar densities. This is just one example. They've done this lots of times. So of course, cougars are elusive and solitary animals. The dogs were sent on 4-week surveys to detect scat of the cougars. Of course, they did it. And it was found to be a viable, non-invasive method to determine population densities of the cougar, which I think is pretty amazing. Now to the smaller side of it. Here, the dogs were actually used to detect endangered stonefly species. So they can also detect invertebrates, as I mentioned before. So this species is the largest stonefly in Australia. It is an endangered vertebrate, and the dogs were found to be able to alert to stoneflies that have not been spotted by experienced surveyors, which I just think is really great. It's much better using your nose than using your eyes. Okay, and now to show you a bit of more aquatic application of the dogs. So they also use the dogs to monitor contaminants in freshwater ecosystems. So here they actually got the otter and mink scat. And of course, collecting scats is a non-invasive method versus actually capturing the animals. And they could monitor the amount of heavy metals, human-made organic compounds, and all of that in the environment. They're also able to determine the genetics of the population. And of course, we know how important that is for isolated populations. And to the plants now. So dogs can detect plants, especially plants that are low densities or difficult to find. You can actually train the dog to match to sample, which basically means you present them with a sample and they're able to find that specific sample of plant A. And then you can present them with plant B sample and they're able to detect plant B in the area then. And the dogs were shown to be 100% reliable for finding this. Dogs can also help with controlling of new invasive species or monitoring the spread of new invasive species. And they're obviously found to be more accurate, and they can actually find smaller samples in comparison to humans. We're only using our eyes, they're using their noses. They can detect much smaller samples than we can. Okay, and now to a very cool one, is dogs are also used to detect diseases, which we know, but they're used to detect honeybee diseases. So American foul brood is a bacteria that's absolutely devastating to honeybee colonies. The only way to get rid of it is to destroy the infected hive. This has actually been introduced to South Africa now. It hasn't spread that much yet, if I understand correctly, but it is here in South Africa now as well. And especially the Maryland Department of Agriculture, they are at the forefront of doing this. And then American foul brood sniffer dogs in New Zealand as well. So they trained these dogs to find, or to indicate that there is this bacteria in the honeybee hive. It's a non-invasive method because you don't need to open the hive. The dogs literally walk past the hives and indicate whether it's there or not. It's often used when beekeepers want to inspect their hives before moving them to a different place, so to limit the spread of this disease. And I think that is really nifty. So on the right here, you can see this pie chart where it shows the visual signs after dogs have indicated that there is American foul brood in the hives. So here where it says the hive did not show visual signs up to 3 years later, I actually know that some of those colonies started to show visual signs of having American foul brood present in the colony up to 4 years after the dogs have indicated that it's there. And I think this can really limit the spread of this disease. And now to South Africa, to something closer to home and some important projects happening here. So here we have Jessie, the Border Collie. She's also on Facebook, so you're welcome to follow her. And Esther Matthews, which is her human as well, and her handler. So Esther works for the Endangered Wildlife Trust now with the dryland conservation projects. Sorry about that. And Jessie is actually trained to scent match. Just give me a second. Yes, so Jessie is actually trained to scent match. So she's busy finding a few more species to the 2 that I've mentioned in here. So keep an eye on the Facebook page if you're interested in that. Esther basically got her and used her for her master's project, which is the case study on canine detection of giant bullfrog scent. Here, Jessie located and identified traces of the giant bullfrogs. And it's just a really great amphibian example of the use of conservation detection dogs. And Jessie is also now trained to find and indicate on the riverine rabbit, which is a critically endangered rabbit here in South Africa. It's only found in a small area in South Africa, nowhere else. So it's a very elusive rabbit as well, so it's not easy to find. It makes conservation really hard. She trained Jessie only using roadkill specimens and hair samples from museums. And Jessie was actually able to distinguish with 98% specificity between the riverine rabbit and other lagomorphs, which is really reliable still. And that's definitely more than we humans can do with our eyes. So all of this data is used to understand the distribution of the riverine rabbit and to help the conservation of the species. And here we have Bryn, and her handler is Vicky Hudson, who also trained her. So they work for Cape Nature, which has their special conservation detection dog project. So this was the first of its kind to happen in South Africa around 2005, if I remember correctly. So Bryn is trained to find the critically endangered geometric tortoise. 90% of this tortoise's habitat has already been destroyed for various reasons. So some of them include invasive species like pigs, urbanization, wheat and wine farming, fires, habitat fragmentation, and poaching. Poaching is also a huge one because this tortoise species is endemic to a very small portion of South Africa as well. Bryn helps them determining the abundance of the species in an area, or if the tortoises are even found in that area anymore. So she indicates on the live tortoises, basically. These tortoises also don't really do well in captivity, and their coloration makes them really hard to spot in nature. And that also makes them prone to observer bias, which the dogs don't have because they're using their noses and not their eyes. So our third one here in South Africa is green dogs conservation. So this was started by Rox Brummer. If I remember correctly, she contacted Louise from the Conservation Canine Consultancy in the UK to help train the first cheetah scat detection dogs in South Africa since 2005. They have since grown, and now they have scat detection dogs, scent matching detection dogs. They also have anti-poaching dogs. So these dogs also detect snares, so they can eradicate snares. They have dogs that chase birds, for example, on airports. And then they also breed Anatolian shepherds for farmers, so that the farmers can use these dogs to protect their livestock, which stops the farmers from shooting carnivores and other predators like cheetahs. So that's also a way in which they conserve the predators in the area. And someone truly awesome is Sean Falloon from the South African Wildlife College. So these are basically, they use packs of dogs to find poachers. Often they actually follow these dogs from helicopter. The dogs get deployed out to follow the scent of the poachers. A lot of times they chase the poachers up into the trees, and Sean and the team follow from the air. So this would be used in situations like rhino poaching, elephant poaching, things like that. And here you can see all the dogs are fitted with GPS collars, and they've been trained from the day they were born, basically, to do this type of work. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows for conservation detection dogs. There are a lot of risks involved. Death and injury. The terrain can be very dangerous. There can be dangerous plants and animals and diseases, dependent on where you are. In some areas, obviously, the risk can be less than in others, but this is something very important to take into consideration. The dog's health care is also important to consider. For injury prevention and treatment, if there is an injury, first aid kits, you need to carry that around always. Parasite control, very important because you are in the natural environment. Nutrition and exercise, it's also very important because these are working dogs. These dogs need a veterinary care and physiotherapy, and the list goes on, but definitely these dogs need to be treated like working dogs to make sure that they are fit and ready to be able to work in the field. Because we're working with live animals, relevant permits and certifications are very, very important. A lot of organizations aren't certified to train dogs, and the dog training field is unregulated, unfortunately. So if you're looking to find someone that does this type of work, make sure that they are certified. and that they use the correct methods for training these dogs. It's sometimes also very hard to find suitable accommodation or travel arrangements for the dogs, which can also really limit the work that the dogs can do. However, other times you're basically camping out in the field with your dog. And then there's also continual costs involved where the dog's performance needs to be evaluated and re-evaluated. Training needs to be kept up. And this is something that not everyone always considers. So how can you get involved? There are tons of organizations. If you'd like to learn more, there are a few podcasts. So two of my favorite podcasts is the Conservation Canine podcast and the Canine Conservationists podcast. In particular, Kayla is running a fundraiser right now. So she's from the Canine Conservationist. That's the one right on the left-hand side with the green canine. She's running a fundraiser because she recently bought a van that needs a bit of repair work, but she'll basically be able to live out of this van with her dogs when they are doing surveys. So if you can donate anything towards that, it would really be appreciated. Here's another few links, I guess, to people that might be in your area, doing work in your area. So it's definitely worthwhile contacting them. If you want to get involved in some way, if you want to volunteer, if you want to donate, if you actually want to be a handler of a conservation dogs. The Canine Conservation Consultancy Canine from the UK does a lot of educational workshops and things like that. So definitely that's worth looking into if you are from the UK and you're here tonight. But for sure, you can do more than actually working in the field. Okay, and so this is basically the end of the presentation now. I kept it short and sweet for you guys. And I hope you had some great takeaways from the presentation. I'd love to hear, what you learned in the comments. So please tell me your biggest takeaway. I'd really love to know. So in reality, we've only just scratched the surface of this topic. Definitely get in touch with me if you are more curious about it. Even if you're just curious about scent work for your pet dog, that's definitely something you can also get involved in. So what I'm going to do for you guys that attended tonight, I'm going to open up the opportunity for anyone here. You're going to get first grabs at a booking with a free consultation with me. The info on this webinar may have been enough, and that's cool, but if it's not, then you can find my contact details here. Drop me an email and we can arrange that call. You know where to find me. I also have a number of courses, webinars, workshops coming up in the next few weeks, so you can follow me on Facebook or drop me an email and I can keep you updated with that if that's something that you're interested in. But make sure to get your spot on those if you are. And yeah, let's arrange a call. Let me find the best fit for your dog. I'm going to go through the questions now and go through the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing in a minute. So grab a screenshot if that's what you want, but you'll get my contact details with the email as well. Okay, cool. So just going through the chat box here. So you'll find the recording of the presentation in an email from me early next week. And then you can go through that at your own time. By the way, I apologize. My camera is temperamental, so I am here. You just can't see me. If there's anyone that would like to ask a question, now is the time. Okay, cool. Guys, remember to tell me what your takeaway was. I'd really like to know. Who is raising their hand? So conservation detection dogs. So the question here is how much are they used in the US? They are used quite a lot. That's actually one of the countries that really have a lot of conservation detection dogs. So conservation canines from, I think, the University of Washington that I mentioned just now with Dr. Samuel, they're in the US as well. They're really at the forefront of this too, but definitely US is one of the big ones. Any other questions, guys? Okay, so this question, am I involved in any conservation work at the moment? Do I have plans to expand? Definitely. So as I really briefly mentioned at the beginning, our newest project is getting dogs to do bat carcass detection on wind farms. So we humans, we really struggle to see little bats lying in the grass, lying in the mud, and dogs can very easily detect that. They also increase accuracy of the data collected there. So that's our new project at the moment. All right, next question. Oh, dogs have an amazing versatile nose. It's amazing. Okay, most of the dogs are rescues, not all of them. Some people actually breed dogs, sell them for huge amounts of money, which in my opinion is not needed. Of course, there are pros and cons to everything, but a lot of the organizations use rescue dogs. So for us, we have a mix. Okay, so what I'm going to do in the email is I'm going to drop a little bit more information on the certification process, because there are some people that are interested in that. We are also in the process of getting certified. So I think that's really going to help you guys. Just to note, not all of these organizations that I mentioned are actually certified, but it's just something that I feel is personally important. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so if you guys would like to schedule that call with me, drop me an email and we can arrange all of that. All right, so the next question. What is the chance that a dog might confuse one carcass for another carcass or scent? Okay, so dogs can distinguish between species and between individuals in a species, dependent on how you train them. So an example of this is, for example, a dog that is deployed to find a missing person. So they get mostly presented the scent, and then there they go, they find the person. So they don't find every single human in the area. They focus on finding that one scent. But dogs can also be taught to find, for example, bat carcasses, but not other carcasses like, for example, a rat carcass or something like that. So it really just goes down to the specificity at which you train the dogs. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, just send me another question and I'll do my best. So they are, but not that I know really personally. Okay, so the question here is, do you see many dogs crossing over from other types of detection work, like search and rescue or human remains or things like that? Not that I've really noticed, and not that I personally know. I know there are lots of dogs that aren't suited for other types of detection work. Like I mentioned, dogs might not be suited to work in a city. So instead of finding drugs or missing people or something like that, they do very well in the conservation setting. But that's a very interesting question. I'll try and find an answer and drop it in the email. Okay, next question. You mentioned that some of the dogs are used with helicopters following them. Does this not distract the dogs? So it doesn't, because these dogs are basically trained from the time that they're puppies for this type of work. So they are desensitized, counter conditioned likely. So it does not distract them at all. No. And they use the helicopters because of the African terrain, because of the bush. They can't really follow in cars or anything. And it's of course really hard to keep up with running dogs in the bush if you're a human. Yes, I hope that answers your question. Any other questions, guys? Okay, another question. Do I know if detection dogs are used to detect specific types of birds like quail? So yes, that is something that happens. So I know actually in South Africa here, the Gun Dog Association with their field trials, they actually, while they're doing this, take notes and do the surveys, and then just send through the data to the whichever university is handling the data at the time. Yes, so that's definitely something that does happen. Okay, next question. Would the dogs retire? If so, when and why? Yes, so definitely dogs retire just like us humans. So they might, well, each dog is an individual. So the dog might just be getting old. It might not want to do the work anymore. Possibly not that, but yes, the dog might just be getting a little bit old for the rigorous work that this does require. When that would be dependent on the dog and the circumstances. So I definitely think the retirement question is up to the individual circumstances. Okay, so I've heard that it's very difficult to find someone or an organization willing to train new conservation dog teams. Is that my experience? To some degree, I can kind of agree with that, but also not. That's in part why I also started my company to broaden the horizon, basically for people that are interested in this too, just like I am. But because of the financial limits and things like that, that is often the case in conservation. That's mostly the reason why this happens. Yeah. Any other questions? I'd love one more question at least. Okay, another question. Yay. Okay, so on the picture, there seem to be more herding breeds types than hunting breeds types. Is this for a reason? So no, that's not for a reason. I think that was just unconsciously my preference because I love herding breeds. I love all breeds, but especially I have a border collie, so maybe that was just me subconsciously doing that. But no, what I can actually do, just drop me a message in here if you're interested in me including this, is the study actually also looks at the prevalence of the types of breeds used for conservation detection. And I could drop that in there as well, and then you can go through that. But definitely all sorts of breeds are used. I know there's a lot of spaniels that are used. A lot of people use well, yeah, Malinois, but yes, and mixed breeds. Terriers aren't really used in the field that much because of their hunting instinct, but they are often used at like ports of entry and things like that. So definitely a range of breeds. As I said, look at the individual dog and then go from there. Okay, how long have conservation dogs been in use in years? So the earliest mention that I could find is from New Zealand, where they had the dogs detecting the kiwis from the, let me quickly find the date for you. There we go, from the 1890s. That's just what I could find personally. So if anyone has a better answer for me, then feel free to drop that in the chat. Okay, another question. Are the dogs at risk of injury when doing this type of work? Yes, definitely they are at risk of injury. The dogs have to be physically fit to do this work. If they're not, that obviously increases risk of injury. There's so much that can kind of get, you know, got. Whoop. We have an animal in the garden. Sorry, guys. Gotta distract and redirect. Yes, so there is a huge risk. You can think about it: snake bites, injuries from other animals. If something goes wrong, like for instance, in that elephant example that I gave, that could have gone south quite easily. Yeah, definitely. Dogs can get tick-borne diseases. They can eat something they're not supposed to eat. Of course, you train for these types of things, but it is something that can happen. So definitely that is something that you should be well aware of before going into this type of work. Okay. Bella. Okay. If I have an active already at home trained dog, would it be an option to take her for further studies by joining an existing team or something like that? So that would be dependent, I think, on the team you want to join or the organization you want to join, and the type of dog you have and what they're trained for. So just let me know if you meant that they were trained for detection or something like that. But definitely, I think the criteria would be left up to the organization where you would go. But yes, that's an option. Yeah, a lot of the ecologists actually train their own dogs. They train their pet dogs to do something like this. For example, Jessie and her border collie, the example I mentioned here, that's her pet dog. So do they have to go through specific training and pass specific tests? So yes. So here in South Africa, of course, I can speak for South Africa, but I'm sure it's like that around the world because the dogs are working in conserved areas. It probably means that they need permits or something like that. So definitely the dogs do need training, of course, in detecting the things in the natural environment. And yes, so yes, we get our dogs certified as well. Yeah, I hope that answers that question. Any more questions? We have 5 more minutes left. Is there anyone that would like me to unmute them to ask a question out loud? If you would like me to unmute you, just tell me in the comments and then I'll find you and unmute you. Oh, thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. We have 5 more minutes left. I'm going to be here for 5 more minutes. If you randomly think of a question, I am here. So feel free to ask. So what made me get involved with this type of work? So I love dogs. I have my canine qualifications and I'm actually a zoology student at the moment. And this is kind of the compromise between my two passions, which makes it double awesome. Yeah. I have a random question for you guys. What made you interested in this type of work? Why are you here at the webinar today? Okay, another question. Is it common for government agencies or private businesses to contact conservation dog teams? So I would say yes, it can be. So some of the dogs are part of government agencies. There are government agencies that have their own dogs and private businesses. So for example, if an ecologist has to do a survey, they might hire a conservation dog team to help them with the survey, as is the case with us and the surveys with the bat carcass detection things. But yes, definitely. But this is also why I did this webinar, because a lot of people don't know about it. And I definitely think it's such an awesome thing to do. And I want it to be more prevalent. Okay, let me scroll. Okay, cool. So we have more dog enthusiasts here. Thank you so much for your compliments on the webinar. Okay, cool. Any last questions before we sign off? Okay, cool. Yeah, so lost dog tracking, please get in touch. Definitely interested. Okay, here we have another question. I'm currently doing a project on stress physiology in which we have to collect fecal samples. Unfortunately, my project can only take up a year. How long would you need to be able to accurately train the dogs for fecal detection? Okay, so yeah, so that kind of also depends on the dog, the circumstances. It can be done in 6 months, it can be done in 2 weeks, depending on the dog you're training, if the dog has done this type of training before, or if it's something that's completely new to them. So it's definitely, it depends, yeah. Oh yes, yeah. Battersea sent some of their dogs to be working dogs. I think I have definitely actually heard of a mention of you guys somewhere. Okay, we have 1 more minute. Any questions? Can I include a few resources which have published articles on conservation detection dogs in my email? I can definitely do that. I have tons. So if there's something you would like me to send you specifically, then please let me know in the chat quickly. Else I'll just send through a few of my favorites, I guess, but definitely. And you'll get the recording. So the ones that I have mentioned in the recording, you can also look that up on Google Scholar quickly. Okay, great, guys. I think let's sign off now. If you have any other questions, email me. You have your free call, so definitely I'm looking forward to that. Yes, so invasive plant species and quail detection. Yes, very cool. That's definitely something. So I'm going to sign off now. You'll get your email early next week with the recording, the relevant links, and a link where you can book me for your call. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for attending. Cool. Thanks, guys. Bye.